Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are but rules taught by men. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men. These words of the son confronting the shepherds, self-proclaimed shepherds of Israel, harshly, are often categorized as the good God vilifying the bad people, like a comic book, sort of like the propaganda of World War II and the evil Nazis, which is still prevalent. Not to say they weren't evil, not to say that they weren't bent on destruction and bad, and their methodology was any good. But the propaganda of the Allied forces, the US, the Great Britain, France, and what still lingers, but what was very powerful before, that thing about the good versus the bad, that there are good humans and bad humans, is a very appetizing and delightful philosophy, way of looking at the world, way of looking at the experience. Because it plays nicely on what's in man, that is, to be part of that group that's good, not part of the group that's bad. As hard to believe as it might be, the German people didn't think of themselves as bad, evil. They thought of themselves the same way the American and the British and the French thought of themselves. Because it's there in all of the animals, this need to feel good and right and special and better and best. And it's illustrated perfectly in this propaganda because it's very high. It's very salient in this whole war manner, especially in the minds and the philosophy of the winners. It's not a history lesson. It's about that thing that's in the animals. It's about that thing that's in the animals that drives them, that's present, and it makes them want to engage in this type of consideration about themselves, being part of the good team. Because it's the same drive that drives all the groups who claim to be on the same type of good team. Those who agree that their God is better. Those who give that currency of their agreement, which is very valuable and very powerful. And you can see how powerful it is by seeing it in this other light about the propaganda. Because it really is about exploiting what's naturally in the animal to get that momentum going for whatever group is considering itself the good team. And the Allied forces had proof that they were the good team because of their victory. It's the same instance of the gods of an ancient nation being validated because that nation destroyed another nation. Same thing. They would go into the temple and take all the artifacts or all the gods and then bring them into their temple, and it would be that validation that their gods were better. It's the same thing. This validation happens on all levels. It's the same kind of phenomenon that goes on, and it's the same thing that was going on here. It's the same thing that goes on all the time when people read these words and they read them as that the God who validates them and their agreement that they give to each other is vilifying these enemies, these bad people, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, as represents the evil group that is against them, that is against their God. It's the same phenomenon. Jesus was harsh to these men. Not just because they were animals driven by this need to protect their status quo, which is a hideous thing, but because they allowed themselves to be called leaders of God's people. Because he considered that a sacred thing, to be chosen as a leader of God's people, because he was chosen by the Father to be this great leader of God's people. It wasn't conferred upon him by other men. It wasn't validated. That position wasn't validated by other men, and so that he was lifted up and made this leader. That's what the second temptation was all about, jumping off the temple so that the humans would see him lifted up by the angels and would validate him, and he would be lifted up by man and man's agreement, that very valuable thing that man looks for, wants to get, wants to purchase from others by promising them. By promising them that they can be part of the good team.